Hej på er!
Hej. 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 Hej.
När du blir större, vad skulle du vilja jobba med då?
Att bli polis. Ja, jag vill jobba astronaut. Jag vill gärna bli forskare.
Arkitekt.
Kanske typ frisör eller någonting. Fotbollsspelare. Polis. Så här, ta hand om djur också. Också typ djur, hästar eller veterinär eller någonting. Det är
Supermodel.
En supermodel?
Ja.
Måste man inte vara snygg då?
Jo, det är därför du jobbar på VVC.
Varför vill du bli polis?
för att det låter kul att fånga tjuvar.
Man tjänar mycket.
Det är kul att hjälpa andra, det är kul att upptäcka nya saker, det är kul att utforska.
Alltså både lönen och så, men jag gillar ganska mycket att rita.
Att göra folk snygga.
Men om vi säger, det verkar det roligt så här att kunna, att man jobbar med att lära sig nya saker?
Ja.
Förtroende, kvalitet. Men det är ju vad en revisor gör. Men vad tror du om att bli revisor? Inte? Om ni skulle gissa då, vad låter det som? Revisor.
Typ som bestämmer. Alltså,
Någon som bestämmer?
Ja.
Ja.
Jag vet inte. Jag tror det är någonting med film.
Något med film? Ja.
Kanske någon som bestämmer.
Som bestämmer? En revisor bestämmer?
Att man gör typ en film som man pratar i.
Jag vet inte, någon som håller på med typ böcker eller datorer.
Är det roligt att jobba som revisor?
Ja.
Det är roligt?
Ja.
Varför tror du det är kul då? Och vet du vad en revisor gör?
Nej.
En revisor jobbar med, det är som en sifferdetektiv.
Ja.
Som kollar på siffror för företag och ser så allting stämmer.
Mhm.
Vad tror du om det, Emin? Verkar det roligt? Kanske.
Ja, då är det väl typ en lärare.
Men vem vill sitta och hålla på med pengar?
Det vill man inte?
Nej.
Okej. Verkar det vara ett roligt arbete då?
Nej.
Nej. Okej.
Jag vill bli en revisor.
Kanske.
Ni vill inte bli revisorer då?
Nej.
Nej.
Vad är det?
Är ni sugna på att bli revisorer?
Nej.
Nej. Okej. Nej. Förstår ni att jag vill att ni ska välja revisorsrollen som jobb istället för forskare och polis? Det märks.
Det märks.
Hur går det för mig då?
Det går väldigt dåligt.
Det går väldigt dåligt, ja. Magiskt. Ja. Så är det. Har vi några revisorer här? Ja, några. Det ser tufft ut för er, men vi kommer komma tillbaka. Jag ska säga att inga barn har kommit till skada under den här inspelningen. Det är min dotter som jag kunde vara lite extra hård mot där, så att jag ville bara säga det så ni vet om det. Hur brygger vi över till det här nu till nästa pass? Med revisorer och rapportering och grejer. Den får du ta, Mara.
Får jag ta den?
Absolut.
Ja, absolut. Jag har för mig att du skulle säga någonting om att själva rapporteringslandskapet kommer att förändras och ja. Yes, precis så är det. Och revisorns roll blir ju allt viktigare. Man blir lite grann som en gatekeeper för vad som kommer att publiceras framöver och publiceras redan idag. Men inte minst när det kommer till just hållbarhetsrapporteringen. Och hållbarhetsrapporteringen är ganska het potatis just nu. Jag vet inte om CSRD kanske kan ha någonting att göra med den saken. Skulle kunna vara. Men det är ju så att vissa får ont i magen bara av tanken av att hållbarhetsrapportera. Vissa ser det bara som någonting som man liksom ska avrapportera. Medan andra faktiskt ser det här som någonting som man faktiskt kan bygga en affär på. Man använder det som ett verktyg för att driva på utveckling och hållbarhet och omställning. Och frågan är, hur ligger det till egentligen? Det och mycket mer kommer att diskuteras under nästa pass. Det är så att en av våra deltagare eller paneldeltagare är engelsktalande, så att nästa del i programmet kommer att hållas på engelska. Och här för att moderera det passet är 2 stjärnor på PVC som jobbar som hållbarhetsspecialister, och de är med och ska transformera den här framtida hållbarhetsrapporteringen. Välkomna Karin och Isabelle.
Säger du det här med slide?
Ja.
Of course, we also have a Slido question, so you can dive right into Slido and see the question there. We'll present it at the end. Thank you, Måns. Thank you, Maral, for that lovely introduction. And this is now my 3rd year in a row nagging about that the clock is still ticking for CSRD, and now we are actually ticking on overtime, if we count from the 1st of July this year. So the clock is always a little bit, all right?
Yeah. We here in Sweden actually got some extra time, as you know, so we hope that you've treated that time well.
Exactly, and we're not going to stress too much about the time and the pressure of the timing today. Instead, we're going to focus on this transformational piece. So focus on the transformation that the CSRD is trying to aim at. And we have a lovely panel that we're going to bring up in a moment.
But first, let's have a little glimpse of what's happening outside Sweden. And I have the privilege to welcome our global reporting leader, Nadia Picard, here from PwC. Nadia, can you give us a little outlook on what's happening outside Sweden, in EU, and in the global world?
Yeah, I can. Thank you. And I'm very happy to be here. Very impressive crowd. And the only instruction that I had is do not talk more than 2 minutes. So obviously you know all about CSRD and how it's happening in Europe. If you do, you're smarter than I am, because there's 17 countries right now that have not put CSRD into their local laws yet, and they got a little warning letter from the EU. I'm sure you saw those news. I think Sweden got one as well for extending the timeline. But so I just spoke to some people here, and some people think ISSB is not for them, and at the same time they are filing their data and reporting their data into CDP. So if you haven't noticed, CDP now requires the data to be reported in accordance with IFRS S2, so the ISSB standard for climate reporting. So ISSB is for us as well, right, as we report on CDP data. What you see on here is obviously European Union CSRD, you know all about that. The United States, the SEC rule, it was out there for all of 5 minutes, and then it got pulled back again for more political deliberation, I would say. So let's see what the elections will bring, and then let's see what comes out. The effect it had is everybody in the US is also talking about climate and climate disclosures. We have state initiatives right now that employ a little bit the same approach that CSRD does. If you do business in California, you're bound to have a look at the California climate reporting rules, which are TCFD broadly. I'm simplifying, but broadly. So any global company does business in the US, hence you do business in California, hence you are bound to be reporting under the TCFD rules. So that is happening in the US, so it's spreading despite there not being countrywide rules. Everything that you see in blue is shades of the ISSB, the IFRS sustainability reporting standards being implemented. Australia does it, for example, they say, well, parts of IFRS 1 do not think about reporting outside climate, but you have to report on climate. And by the way, by 2026, it has to be covered by reasonable assurance. So they're going lighter in terms of breadth, but they're going deeper in terms of reliability of the data. And we see something like that happening across the world. You see all the countries, they're all looking at or have already decided to implement ISSB. Anybody of you, global companies, so ISSB is coming your way as well, over and above CSRD.
Thank you, Nadia, for keeping the 2 minutes and your brief explanation about the world. It's very easy to get stuck in the Swedish perspective, so it's good to have that overview. And there's a lot of things happening. But let's focus in a little bit on Sweden, on the Swedish perspective. And for that, we want to welcome our lovely panel on stage.
Welcome to Nadia then, Picard. Welcome to Fredrik Franke, Head of Sustainability Norvestor. We have welcome to Anna Danell, Sustainability Director of Vasakronan. Very welcome. And welcome also to Katarina Skalare, Sustainability Consultant and Interim Chief of Sustainability Communication Officer at Duni Group. I did say that right, didn't I?
Yeah.
Great. Welcome all. Katarina, I think I'll start from this end. Can you please introduce shortly about your role yourself and the perspective now with CSRD and the whole reporting transformation journey?
Yeah. I just joined Duni Group, I should say, 1.5 months ago as an interim head and part of group management. And my role there is kind of to combine and get business development closer to sustainability and communication, which often are responsible for all the text in the annual report and so on. To bring them closer and also bring them closer to the business so it will be more integrated. And the way we have taken on the challenge with CSRD is actually that it's driven by the financial department. So it's not driven by sustainability, even though sustainability people, of course, are part of it, of the work. So there is quite a huge a group of people involved from various parts of the organization, but it's driven from finance. And I think that shift you can see in many companies now. And I think it's crucial because there the competence is in the need for documented proof of what you're saying and also documented processes and routines and so on. They are brilliant at that, and we need to have the same quality when it comes to sustainability data.
Let's come back to this shortly. Anna, same question to you, briefly about yourself and perspective of CSRD.
Thank you. Well, I work as the Chief Sustainability Officer at Vasakronan, and I'm responsible for securing that Vasakronan have a sustainable strategy, not a sustainability strategy. Be aware. And in that role, I also oversee our CSRD implementation.
Thank you. Fredrik?
Yes, thank you. My name is Fredrik Franke, Head of Sustainability at a Nordic private equity firm called Norvestor. I'm quite new in the role, about 7-8 months at the moment. So I think my role a little bit here on the panel is to give the investor perspective. Why do we think CSRD is important or a problem? We'll come back to that. And we have about 5 billion euros under management at the moment, represented by roughly 30-35 portfolio companies. And most of them, I think all except for maybe 2 or 3, will have to report CSRD next year. So they're all a bit stressed, and so that's perspective I'll bring as well in the discussion. But I've been working also as a consultant for almost 20 years in sustainability, so I'll bring some of that as well, hopefully.
Very excellent and expertise panelist here.
Exactly. You have a long experience, all of you, so we're hoping for a very good discussion. So the heading of this session is around transformation and really what drives what. Is the transformation driving the reporting, or is it the reporting that drives the actual transformation? So starting off with kind of a broad question, but your reasoning on the transformation, and we can start with more the internal perspective, and what is the organizational transformation that you see needs to happen?
Go ahead. Who wants to go first? Yeah. Well, to be honest, I think within our company, we don't see much of transformation due to the new regulation regarding reporting, because we already had a sustainable strategy where we had already did an analysis on how we impact the environment and how we impact people with our business, and tried to already implement policies, targets and objectives to try to reduce that as much as possible. With that said, of course, a new reporting regulation with a higher demand on assurance definitely puts a burden on the organization in terms of more data that we maybe are not already collecting.
I think what we're seeing both within Norvestor as a company, but also in our portfolio companies, is and especially coming, with CSRD coming up, it's getting closer to the finance department. I think you mentioned also, Katarina. I think it's a good sign of that. We usually gather all our sustainability leaders in all our portfolio companies once a year together with the CEOs. This year we decided to gather them with the CFOs to really just make everybody understand that this is eventually a lot of it will actually end up on the CFO's table, both in terms of actually the reporting and data, but also that if any kind of plans you put in place for carbon reduction or things you want to do, actions you want to take, will need to be invested in. So eventually it will need to be owned by the CFO as well. So I think that's transforming it a little bit from just being the sustainability department, that issues that are really integrated into the planning of the company's future, both from an investment perspective and operations. So.
And I see the internal organizational transformation is what I touched upon earlier, that the responsibility tend to be moved over to finance. But also the requirements on the board that is higher now. So there needs to be ways of communicating if there has not been that before. Many companies have done that. I'm sure you have done that at Vasakronan. So I think that is the major thing. When it comes to transformation in relation to the directive, I don't either see that the company that I represent will do a lot of changes in strategy and so on. But the more important thing is to kind of get a grip of the value chain, the full value chain. And I think there is where companies have the most to do in regards of the requirements. It might drive innovation later on, but I'm not sure it's doing that right now.
We have a survey that we issued, I don't know, before summer, that was in the field in May, and it was amazing. It was across Europe and globally on CSRD preparation, and it was amazing to see that in May of 2024, the preparedness for double materiality assessment, the gap analysis, and the actual getting on with the data was all around like 30%. So really, really late to the game. I think some of that was, well, I think we are done, but we don't have the auditor sign off yet, so I can't say we're done. But it also showed quite interestingly that 70% of companies are still using spreadsheets and only 20-something% are looking into more technology. That conversation in these 6 months has really changed, because the conversations that I have with CEOs, CFOs, they start to realize that getting over the compliance hurdle, but still having all these nice glossy pages from the communications department out there doesn't reconcile, right? It doesn't reconcile because they can't make true on their promises. And I'm sure you're seeing that. You're saying that already because you're bringing the company together. But that compliance hurdle, doing it once a year, is not enough to then really tell you a sustainability story. Or you really need to step away and say, wait a moment, I report, but I don't have a plan, and I don't want to have a plan, right? So we see a lot of that dynamic going on. I think here we're talking to a lot of people who are really in the middle of making it happen, but there is a bigger group out there that is still sitting on the fence and is still trying to decide on, do they look at this as a compliance hurdle or something that changes the company?
Do you also see these discussions internally about tech? Are we going towards that direction, or have you already figured out?
I think that you pointed out quite wisely there that it is kind of a question of compliance for many companies that have done reporting before and have a sustainable strategy in place and so on, that then it becomes a compliant thing. But I think now the requirements goes further to smaller companies as well, and I think that there it will be more major transformation, I think, and kind of an aha, do we need to focus on this, and what does that mean? But you need to be able to really, really identify your most material topics. Otherwise, the most important things will drown in reporting, and that I'm a bit concerned about, that companies might report on too many KPIs that aren't that relevant. And if it were what EU wanted to achieve, they wouldn't ask for a double materiality assessment. They would say you have to report on it all. So I think there is a key to really do a really, really good homework, not to drown in KPI reporting. So.
Because that was actually my next question. I'm turning first to you, Frederick, about if we're not talking about it's a lot of compliance, a lot of things you have to do, you have to dig through, you have to fix your data, you have to fix your processes. What will actually drive the change then?
Yeah, that's a good question.
We had an interesting conversation before about
Did we? Okay.
Your role.
Which one I said? No, I agree, and I think it's I think some of us have been around here for a while in this field. We've seen all the iterations of GRI, NFRD, CSRD, and it's easy to say what's new, what's going to change. And to your question, I think the whole theme of this panel, what is driving what? I mean, clearly the need for transformation is driving the reporting needs. I mean, that's been very clear. I think the regulators in the EU are not happy with the speed of that. You know, we've been, business and the private sector has been giving quite a lot of time to fix this on a voluntary basis, on a market kind of solution basis, and it's not going fast enough. So that's why they really now said we need to do something, and CSRD is a whole different ballgame compared to the previous regulations and standards, clearly. But at the end of the day, it's going to end up with a lot of more reports, a lot of more data. Does that change the needle in itself? And I don't think it does. It could change some culture and insights in companies, absolutely. But I'm thinking more about what are the feedback loops coming out of all this data. In 2-3 years, we're going to have 50,000-60,000 companies in Europe, at least, reporting on a lot of ESG data. I think it might be a perfect storm with all that information coming out, with actually now AI and all the possibilities that you actually have to analyze that data. It's going to be so much easier, accessible for almost anyone. If you're going to, a student, applying for a company, just go in, AI, check, gender pay gap, best and worst in class, forget about the bottom part or whatever. It's going to be so much data that's available and it's transparent. So it's more about what do and who does what with that data. And I think regulators, if they're smart, they will analyze the data thoroughly. And I think we're going to see additional regulation and policies coming out based on what they find. Because I think they're going to see that some industries are not doing what they need to do, and some companies are not doing what they need to do within those industries. There will be regulations, there will be taxations. So I think it's rather what's coming out of the reporting and what are we going to learn from the data. And I think from an investor perspective, for us, it's actually great because we're trying to find companies that we believe are good companies, but with a great potential. So we need to find out as much as we can, and it's sometimes hard because it's companies that are not public and the data is not available. All of a sudden, we're going to have a lot more data around a lot of things. I mean, call it CSR, ESG, sustainability, but it's data about the company performance that's going to be available. So I think for us, from an investment perspective, I think it's a great opportunity to make it much more easier for us to analyze the company and see the potential. We have a management with great ambitions, but they have a lot to do. And with small means, from whatever it could be, we can actually enhance the value of this company. So I think I'm more interested in what's going to come out of all this data eventually. The value-driven perspective. Yeah. Anna, what's your take on this? I mean, you talked about your sustainable strategy. So do you mirror the same, or do you have another opinion?
No, but what I think will happen in our sector, construction and real estate, is that the reporting burden will eventually lead to a total transformation of our sector. Vasakronan is a real estate company owning buildings. What we do is leasing office premises to other companies. And typically, we are the largest supplier to our tenants. They don't spend any money that large on other types of suppliers. And therefore, we will be like the main contact when they are looking at their value chain. So we need to help them with their reporting, with a lot of energy consumption in the building, CO2 emissions from the buildings, and a lot of the maintenance and janitorial services that we provide in the buildings. And that, before CSRD, I think a lot of those issues were kind of hidden in our sector. Some of us were talking about energy consumption and CO2 emissions, but we didn't see a lot of demand from the tenants. But now it will be a a total divider in the market. Either you do this and you're able to help your tenants with their reporting, or either you're out. And the second thing where we see a lot of changes is the possibility to borrow capital. Typically, real estate owning or property owning requires a lot of capital, and now it is almost impossible to get your hands on any loan, or if you're in the bond market, you need to do this even without the regulation. You have to be transparent to be able to continue borrowing money in the debt capital market or from banks.
Anna, you also mentioned to me that the taxonomy and the data from the taxonomy, you have already seen how that is being used. Could you mention just a few words on that?
Yes, we've already seen in our sector that environmentally certified buildings is really important if you do business to business in the real estate market. But what we now see is that the taxonomy is going to be the new deal breaker. Either your building is taxonomy aligned, and then it will be easy to lease it to other companies. If it's not even negotiable. Okay. The tenants will leave those buildings. Wow. And it's actually happening right now. It's really interesting to see. And also, once again, related to the possibility to borrow money.
And that would be a challenge as well, if they leave buildings, because the property is still there, and should it be there unused, or should it be used? So it's really
well, what I think is that this is a huge possibility to become more circular in the whole industry. Instead of continuing to develop new buildings, maybe we can transform the whole industry to redevelop existing buildings and use the square meters that are already here, which is better for the resource consumption, CO2 emissions, and our impact in the value chain on biodiversity, etc.
Yeah, did you get also the possibility to answer just on the transformational piece, Katarina?
Yeah, I think that the company I used to work for earlier was a real estate company, but focusing on residential. And there the capital market has really, really tough requirements, just as you point out. And also the taxonomy reporting was really essential to drive transformation, I would say, because the capital market started to ask, why are these properties so low in EPC labeling, whilst others are this and that, and being able to start to compare. But there's another challenge with a lot of EU regulation, that it's implemented differently in different countries. So what is good with CSRD is that it looks like it's going to be implemented the same in all countries, but that's not the case, for example, energy efficiency of buildings directive. That's totally different, so, and that's a challenge.
Yeah. And we spoke a little bit before this session as well on what's happening in the world and the cost of everything, and how sustainability might be a little bit lower on the agenda. I don't know if you want to comment on that. If you want to start, Katarina.
That's true. It's super expensive to invest in properties, for example, right now, and also tough to get capital for doing that. But you can see that the sustainability investment within that sector is really paying back, no matter where in Europe you do it. It brings you yield, return on the investment, because you use less energy and so on. So in certain sectors, it's easier to make those positive calculations than in others. So.
Yeah. We're looking at, we as PwC globally, we're sitting on something that we're not quite ready to issue yet, but there's evidence in the market that if you really look at your carbon data and you understand where the energy demand sits on a quite granular level, obviously you start to see cost plays, right? So carbon out, cost out is a very simple equation that really, really drives the lightning bulb to go off for a lot of businesses. I'm sure you see it in the construction, in the real estate industry, and in other industries as well. at the minimum with those that are somewhat carbon intensive, right? And I'm sure we will see other levers that will either add value by de-risking, and that is something that you might be after as an investor as well, or then look for new opportunities to change the business model slightly to be more sustainable, but also find new customers that consumers, us, were changing our behavior. So I think that value play gets drowned in the whole effort of compliance right now. So we need to get out of that. You mentioned it, right? We need to see a year or two into it to find this.
Yeah, and our clock is also ticking here on stage. So we need to start to close off the panel, but I wanted you also to be able to give your some good advice for this implementation and the transformation journey to all the listeners that we have. Do you want to start, Katarina?
Yes, I can. Try to keep it simple, because it's so easy to overcomplicate CSRD and the requirements. Look at it with a quite pragmatical issue and make your double materiality analysis thoroughly, so you really understand, and that your board and your management teams understand what are the most material topics to focus on, and make sure to do that well and have good processes in place and so on. I think that would be helpful to, well, be practical is the best I can say.
Thank you. Anna?
Well, be aware not to fall deeper into details and compliance, and you're already within your financial reporting. What we actually see now is that sometimes we have higher demands on statements that we will put in our CSRD report. The exact statement we've already done 10 years in our financial report somewhere. But now when we're supposed to say it also in the CSRD report, it requires a signed proof from the board of directors that this is actually true. Which is, of course, I mean, it's good that you really want to be ambitious, but be aware to not take it more seriously than what you're already doing with the financial reporting.
Erik?
So many things, but I think, and we talked about it, we had dinner, a couple of us yesterday, we talked about sometimes you get so stuck in the details, and it's important, you need to interpret the regulation and understand what you need to do. I agree, you know, try to not overcomplicate it, and I think try to think about what's behind it. What was the intent of the regulators when they did this? Is it that they really wanted the big four to have more audit work in the coming years? Probably not. That would be a nice consequence for you guys. But I think they really wanted to see something. They really wanted to drive change. And it's a hard regulation in terms of reporting. It's hard, but it's a soft regulation in terms of it's not taxation, it's not prohibition. It's actually, you know, just a demand of much higher level of transparency. So still giving the market a chance to kind of self-regulate based on information, transparent information. That's the whole idea. So keep that in mind while you're doing it. So, and I think that makes it easier to understand what do we need to report on. If we're going to spend time on reporting some really minor data that is not really important for us, or to move any meter anywhere, you know, try to just put it out of scope, and you have to motivate it, of course, but you know, do that and really focus on the top things that you think can really drive change. Yeah.
Really quickly, I'm going to contradict. It sounds contradictory, but I think on what matters, on the really material things, go deep and find the value drivers for your business. And that requires detail on data, on a granular level and frequency level. So that is the lessons that my clients have given me. So.
Thank you so much. The time flies. Our clock is still ticking. But yeah, huge thank you to our panel.
Thank you.
All right, we just want to end this session with some final advice from us, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah. 3 advices shortly. We believe that a top-down leadership is essential. It should be established, and why not have an incentive structure for your sustainability work? Why not have an incentives for the sustainability reporting and the performance?
Yeah, and also identify the go-to persons for the full sustainability reporting within the organization, and not to forget, not least on tech and the data side. And there might be need for some upskilling where it's needed.
And last but not least, aligning with the number one, but establish accountability within your company. I mean, I'm stealing a little bit of Nadia's words, but of course, select your priorities and work with them. You can establish metrics, have responsible persons, and make sure to track this. That will drive a change.